Hello, and welcome to our Learning to Sew series. This is our most comprehensive guide on getting you started to sew. Today, we've compiled all 7 episodes into one resourceful video for you. While I may not be the expert guiding you through these techniques, I assure you, you're in great hands. We'll cover everything from setting up your machine to mastering zippers and hems. If you want a more focused approach, you can watch each individual episode. We've linked that playlist in the description below. Now, let's get you started on your sewing adventure.
Welcome to our Sailrite workbench. This is the first part of a series called Learning to Sew. We're going to teach you everything you need to know to get started as a sewer. So if you've just purchased a sewing machine or you're looking to purchase one, this is the perfect place for you. We're going to show you the basic sewing principles on our Sailrite Ultra Feed, but you can apply them to whatever machine you own. In this first video, we're going to teach you how to set up your sewing machine to get started sewing. We're going to give you a basic overview of each step that you'll need to take, but if you don't have the Ultra Feed, you may need to check your guidebook for specifics on each step. Let's start with the different parts of the machine. So first, we have our presser foot. It's made up of an inside foot, an outside foot, and a feed dog, which is located underneath the needle plate. The foot of this machine is called a walking foot because the upper feet and the feed dog move together to feed the fabric as you sew. This lever on top of the Ultra Feed moves the presser foot up and down. This allows you to lift the foot, place your fabric where you want it, and then you can place the foot back down. Depending on your sewing machine, this foot lever may be located on a different part of your machine. This metal piece underneath the foot is the needle plate. Our machine has seam allowance markings on the needle plate that you can use as a guide when you sew. The lever on the front is the stitch length lever. This allows you to set the length of your forward and reverse stitching. So you can move these knobs on the top and the bottom to set your forward and reverse stitch. Then you can simply pull the spring-loaded lever down to sew in reverse and then release it to return to forward stitching. Now some sewing machines can do straight stitches and zigzag stitches like the Ultra Feed LSE. Because of this, the Ultra Feed LSE has a couple extra levers. So above the stitch length lever, we have our stitch width lever. This lever changes the width of the zigzag stitches. The lever next to this is the needle position lever. This allows you to change the position of the needle to the right, the left, or the center. This is especially helpful when sewing close to the fabric edge or close to a zipper. But it's important to note that only the LSC has these levers. The Ultra Feed LS only sews straight stitches, so it doesn't need stitch width and needle adjustment levers. If you don't have an Ultra Feed, check your machine's guidebook to see how stitch length, stitch width, and needle position is set. Another feature located on the front of our machine is the stitch tension knob. This dial increases and decreases the tension of the upper thread. This will need to be adjusted depending on the type of fabric and the number of layers that you're working with on your projects. On the right side of the machine is where our balance wheel is located. By pulling the wheel towards yourself, you can manually operate this machine. This is helpful for setting the machine in a specific position or manually setting a stitch. Now we're ready to plug in our foot pedal as well as the machine and turn it on. So now on to stitching. So to create a stitch, you need 2 threads. One is going to come from the top and one is going to come from below the machine. The thread below is held on a bobbin. So the next step is to wind and install a bobbin. So we're going to tilt our machine back to access our bobbin holder. We're going to remove it from the machine and then go ahead and take the bobbin out. We will wind our bobbin and then reinstall it in our bobbin case and place it under the machine. Lastly, you need to thread your machine. Each machine is a little different, so again, refer to your guidebook for bobbin winding and threading instructions. So once the machine is threaded, you'll need to pull the bobbin thread up. So to do this, hold the top thread and rotate the balance wheel until the bobbin thread pops up. Then you can use a little utensil to slide it out, just like so. These are the first steps to set up your machine to sew. Now, if you have an UltraFeed or you're interested in purchasing one, we've linked some additional video resources in the description below, so make sure to check those out. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to us and press the notification bell so that you can be the first to know when our next video in this series is released. We'll see you guys next time. Welcome to our Sailrite workbench. This is the second video in a series we're calling Learning to Sew. So whether you're new to sewing or you need a refresher, this is the perfect place for you. In today's video, we're going to be showing you how to start sewing on your machine. We're going to be showing you these steps on the UltraFeed LSC, but you can apply these basic principles to any machine. Now, before we get into the actual sewing, I think it's important to understand how a stitch is created on your machine. So a stitch is made with two threads, the top thread and the bottom thread, which is held on a bobbin. We talked about bobbins and how to install them in part 1. So if you want a refresher on bobbins, feel free to check out part 1 again. When the needle goes through the material, the gib hook under the feed dog swings forward and grabs the upper thread and wraps it around the bobbin thread to create a loop. The take-up arm goes down when the gib hook takes the top thread so that the tension is released to form the loop. Once the loop is formed, the take-up arm rises back up to tighten the loop, which forms the stitch. That's the basic mechanics of how a machine sets a stitch. So with that information, we can go ahead and start sewing. To get started sewing, we're going to be using 2 layers of canvas, which are pretty thin, to test our stitch tension. So using 2 layers of whatever fabric that you're going to be using to sew is a good amount to test your stitch tension with. So we've already installed a needle and we've already threaded our machine, but make sure that you have the appropriate thread and needle for your fabric type. So we're going to start by raising our presser foot, placing the fabric underneath and lowering it. And we're also going to go ahead and turn our machine on. Now before you start sewing, it's important to decide what stitch length and stitch type you'd like. We're going to be using a 4mm stitch length and a straight stitch. Now an important tip as you start sewing when you make your first few stitches is to hold the loose thread ends back so that you don't end up with a mess of tangled thread at the beginning of your stitch. So we're going to hold these threads back and slowly press down our pedal to sew a few stitches. Once you've sewn a few stitches, you can let go of the loose thread ends. Now we're going to sew a line of stitches to see our stitch tension. Once you have your line sewn, pull the fabric out and check both sides of the stitches. An important tip for taking your fabric out of the machine is 2 things. First of all, make sure that your needle is not buried in the fabric or you won't be able to get your fabric out. Also, make sure that this take-up arm is at its highest position. So if you don't have your take-up arm at the highest position, the machine is still in the process of creating a stitch, which kind of creates a trap thread. But now if you have the take-up arm at its highest position and you lift the foot up, the thread will easily be released. Now to check stitch tension. You want the knot of the stitch to be hidden in the middle of the fabric. So as you can see here, you can't see the knot on the top of our stitch, but on the bottom side, you can see the knot coming out. So this means that our stitch tension is too loose and we're going to need to tighten it. So we're going to place our fabric back under the machine, lower our presser foot, and we are going to tighten our stitch tension knob by 1 full rotation. Then we're going to hold our loose thread ends back like so and sew another line of stitches. Once we get to the end, we're going to make sure that our take-up arm is at its highest position, and then we can take the fabric out. So let's check our stitch tension again. It's good on the top, and it looks like this knot is buried on the bottom side as well. So our stitch tension is good. So follow this process on your machine until you can't see the knot on the top or bottom of your stitches. To make bigger stitch tension adjustments, rotate the stitch tension knob in full rotations. And for more fine-tuned adjustments, you can rotate the knob in half or quarter rotations. If the thread you are using is too large for the fabric being sewn, then the loop will never be fully buried in the 2 layers because the loop thread is thicker than the fabric. So if you're experiencing this, check that you're using the correct thread with your fabric. So now that we've set our stitch tension, it's time to start practicing some basic sewing. So we got another piece of scrap fabric and we're gonna place it under the foot, lower the presser foot, and then we're gonna hold our thread ends back. Now, if you were to continue sewing from here, the end of your stitches would be loose and they could start to unravel. So to prevent that, you want to back stitch over these stitches to lock them into place. So to do that, we're going to hold down our reverse lever and sew over the first few stitches again. Now that you've sewn back to the beginning point, you can release the lever and sew forward again. You're going to want to do this at the beginning and end of every stitch you make to ensure that it's locked into place. So after you backstitch, you can go ahead and sew forward. Because the LSC is a walking foot machine, the machine will feed the fabric for you and all you need to do is guide it. So if you don't have a walking foot machine, you may have to do more work to feed your fabric evenly through the machine. So to keep our stitch straight on this walking foot machine, we're going to stop stitching and reposition our hands and then continue sewing. So if you move your hands while guiding the fabric, your stitch can be a little off. We're going to show an example of each. So if I were to sew and I were to just try to move my hands as I do it, your stitch will not be quite as straight. Now, if you were to sew and then stop sewing, reposition your hands where you need it. It's a short piece of fabric, so if you had a longer piece and you're repositioning, you'll stop, reposition, and then continue to sew. And then stop, reposition, and continue to sew. And this is just going to ensure that you have a straight stitch. When you get to a point where you want to make a sharp turn, go ahead and stop sewing. We're going to want to make sure that the needle is buried in the fabric, and since ours isn't, we're going to go ahead and rotate the balance wheel until the needle is at its lowest point and just starting to come back up. Then we're going to lift our presser foot and rotate our fabric to whatever degree turn that you want to make. We're just going to be making a 90-degree turn here. So once we have it where we want it, we're going to lower our presser foot, and then we can just continue to keep sewing. So we're going to show you these steps again. We're going to rotate our balance wheel until it's at its lowest position, just starting to come up, lift the presser foot, and rotate the fabric. Then if we need to reposition, we'll stop, reposition further back, and continue sewing. So when you're finished sewing, first we're going to backstitch to lock our stitch into place. Then we're going to make sure that our take-up arm is at its highest position. It looks like we kind of timed it pretty well there. We're going to lift our foot and take the fabric out. With those quick tips, you're ready to start practicing your sewing skills. Now, if you're looking for a project to start with, we have plenty of DIY project videos for beginners as well as advanced sewers. Make sure to subscribe to our 2 YouTube channels, Sailrite Workbench and Sailrite DIY, because you won't want to miss out on hundreds of free video resources. If you've missed part 1 of this series, we've linked it down in the description below so you can get caught up. We've also linked a playlist that includes all the videos from this series. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time for part 3 of Learning to Sew. Welcome back to our Sailrite Workbench. This is the 3rd video in a series we're calling Learning to Sew. Today, we're going to be talking about seams. So whether you're new to sewing or you just need a refresher, this is the perfect place for you. We will walk you through popular types of seams, discuss their benefits and potential drawbacks, and show you how to make them. We're going to show you how to do these seams on our UltraFeed LSC, but you can follow along on any sewing machine. First, we're going to start with an overlapping seam. An overlapping seam is the simplest and most straightforward seam to make. It is often used in sail making and canvas projects like awnings, canopies, and some covers. To demonstrate, we have 2 pieces of fabric. Since we're using synthetic fabric, we've cut the raw edges with a hot knife to prevent fraying. Something to keep in mind when you try these seams is seam allowance. Your seam allowance is how much fabric you want to use in your seam. For this overlapping seam, we will mark a 1/2 inch seam allowance on one of our panels. Next, we're going to baste these panels together using 3/4 inch basting tape. Basting tape helps hold the panels in place and, when sewn through, can increase water resistance. Now we'll lay the second panel on top of the seam line we marked, and we'll ensure it's basted down well using our canvas patterning ruler. We're going to be using a 6mm stitch length for this seam. So we're going to line our fabric underneath the presser foot about an 1/8 inch away from this raw edge. When sewing, it can be helpful to line the fabric up with a part of the presser foot to keep the seam straight. So we're going to sew a line, locking our stitches at the beginning and the end. Now we're gonna cut our threads on both ends. Then we're gonna flip our fabric over. Now we're gonna sew our second stitch. So we're gonna line our fabric assembly up about 1/8 inch away from the unfinished edge, just like the other side. And we're gonna sew a line of stitches, locking the beginning and end of our stitches. Now we have our overlap seam. Let's cover some of the properties of an overlapping seam. It uses fabric efficiently because the seam allowance is equal to the seam width, and the seam provides 90% of the fabric's strength. Some downsides are that this type of seam isn't very water resistant in comparison to other seam techniques. Also, no matter which way the assembly lies, the top threads will be exposed to the sun, which shortens the thread life. Next, let's talk about the semi-flat felled seam. This is a popular seam with many professional canvas workers because it provides a clean, finished look while also only exposing one stitch line to the fabric's outside. That stitch is called the top stitch. You'll see this seam on covers, bimini tops, dodgers, and upholstery seating. Again, we've cut our synthetic fabric with a hot knife to prevent fraying. To start, let's mark our seam allowances. We'll measure 1/2 inch on both fabric panels, totaling 1 inch of seam allowance. We also want to consider if our fabric has a right side and a wrong side, also known as an outside and an inside. Our fabric is reversible, so it doesn't have a right and wrong side, but for demonstration purposes, we'll mark the outside and inside so that you can follow along. We're going to want the outside of this panel to face the outside of the other fabric panel. Now let's use our basting tape again and baste the panels in place. We're going to be using a magnetic sewing guide to guide our stitch and keep it about 1/2 inch away from the edge of our fabric. So we're going to take our magnetic sewing guide and put it on our needle plate at the 1/2 inch mark. Now we're going to place our fabric under the foot and sew a line of stitches. Once that stitch is complete, we can take it from under the presser foot, cut our threads. Now we can unfold the pieces. Now the two outside panels should be on the top and the two inside panels will be on the bottom. So we can take our canvas patterning ruler and you'll want to just crease this fabric down. So now that we've folded it over our previous stitch, it should be hidden and there'll be this flap. We want to make sure that we're sewing through this flap, so we're going to remove our magnetic sewing guide and use our presser foot as a guide instead. So we're going to line our fabric under the foot. As we sew this, we want to make sure to gently pull the fabric apart so that we sew the fabric consistently and evenly. So we're going to lock our stitches at the beginning, and then we can keep sewing. So now that we've locked our stitch on the end, we can go ahead and take this out. This is what it should look like when the seam is done. You'll see a single top stitch and then you'll see 2 stitches on the back. The semi-flat felt seam is popular because it is nearly waterproof and exceptionally strong. Its strength is equal to 95% of the strength of the fabric. And because one stitch is hidden from the sun, even if the top stitch fails, the other usually won't. Its only downside is how efficiently the fabric is used. It uses 2 times the seam width as a seam allowance. So a 1/2 inch seam will take up 1 inch of fabric. Next, we have a full flat felled seam, which is the most intricate of canvas work seams. It leaves no raw edges exposed, so you can use scissors to cut your fabric without worrying about fraying. It gives a finished edge on both sides of the fabric and has a hidden stitch. Again, let's start by considering whether your fabric has a right and wrong side. So we're going to mark the inside and outside for demonstration purposes. We'll have one panel with the outside facing up and the other with the inside facing up. Then make a line measuring 1/2 inch from the fabric's raw edge on both panels. We're going to put basting tape underneath the 1/2 inch line we marked on the outside surface panel. Then we'll baste the panels together with both outside surfaces facing one another. The raw edge of the top panel should align with the line we marked on the bottom panel. Again, we're going to be using our canvas patterning ruler to compress the fabric into the basting tape for a strong hold. Next, we're going to sew right on the 1/2 inch line on this top panel. So this stitch is going to be a 1/2 inch away from the top panel and 1 inch away from the edge of the bottom panel. Now we'll take basting tape and apply it to the 1/2 inch lip of the bottom panel. Next, fold it over the top panel's edge. Then place another piece of basting tape on top of that fold and fold the top panel over it. We can use our canvas patterning ruler again to crease it well. Now we have our inside surfaces facing up, and we're going to put it under the foot and sew about 1/8 inch away from this folded edge. So once we've locked our seams, we have a full flat-felled seam. Let's talk about some properties of a full flat-felled seam. This seam is by far the strongest, equal to 100% fabric strength, is nearly waterproof, and has a hidden stitch. Its only drawbacks are that it's pretty labor-intensive and it uses a lot of fabric to create the seam. It uses 3 times the seam width to create this seam, so a 1/2 inch seam will take 1.5 inches of fabric. If you don't mind the extra labor, time, and a little bit more fabric used, this is a great seam for canvas work. Now, as a bonus, we're going to show you a 4th seam that's a little bit more technically advanced. It is called a French seam, but it is also referred to as a double top stitch. It is commonly found in bow and auto upholstery applications that use leather, faux leather, or vinyl. It not only adds visual appeal to your upholstery, but strength as well. To start, we have 2 fabric panels and a piece of polyester binding. The binding helps provide the strength of the seam. We'll take 2 fabric panels and have both the outside or right sides of the fabric facing each other. Take our 2 fabric panels and we have both the outside or the right sides of our fabric facing each other. So we're going to be using our magnetic sewing guide again to ensure that we have an accurate 1/2 inch seam. So we're going to line it up under the foot. Again, ensure that you back stitch. When you sew this seam, make sure to take your time to ensure that the edges of the fabric line up exactly. Then we're going to back stitch at the end. So now that the first stitch is finished, let's unfold the panels, and then you'll see that the inside or wrong side should be facing up, and you'll have this little flap in the middle. So we're going to take this back to our table to add some binding. We are going to create a couple top stitches on either side of the first stitch. To do that, we must flatten out these 2 flanges and attach our binding. We'll use basting tape to do so. When attaching the binding, it is very important that these flaps are flattened. Now we're going to take this piece over to our sewing machine and we're going to sew along either side of our original stitch using the edge of our presser foot as a guide. Once we've done one side, we'll repeat the process on the other. Now we have a French seam. Using heavier threads or even contrasting colors can look the best for this type of seam. Now let's go over some properties of a French seam. Pros of this seam type are that it's strong, especially if you add a fabric or webbing backer. It's also an attractive seam, giving your projects a high-end, polished look. Drawbacks are that the seam isn't very water resistant. Also, the two top stitches are exposed to the sun and are vulnerable to abrasion. But if you won't be using this seam in an outdoor application and you don't mind putting a little extra work into an attractive seam, then the French seam will be a perfect seam for your project. Now you know how to sew 4 different types of seams. If you've missed any of the other videos in this Learning to Sew series, we've linked the playlist in the description below, so make sure to check that out. If you want a project to start your sewing journey, we have plenty of DIY project videos for beginners and more advanced sewers. Make sure to subscribe to our 2 YouTube channels, Sailrite Workbench and Sailrite DIY, because you won't want to miss out on the hundreds of free video resources there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time for part 4 of our Learning to Sew series. Welcome back to our Sailrite Workbench. This is the 4th video in a series we're calling Learning to Sew. So whether you're new to sewing or you just need a refresher, this is the perfect place for you. In today's video, we're going to be going over popular hems. Hemming is a basic sewing skill that is used on a wide variety of projects. A simple finished edge gives any sewing project a professional look. Besides style, hems can also provide function for your project. We're going to demonstrate a variety of hems that are great to know, but if you're looking for a specific hem, you can also skip to that chapter. Before we go over hem techniques, we're first going to go over some notions that can be helpful when sewing hems. We have some basting tape, pins, and clips. Each sewing aid has its advantages. Basting tape is a double-sided tape that holds 2 layers of fabric together. Some advantages of this notion is that it doesn't create holes in material, it's easier and faster to apply than pins when working on large fabric assemblies, plus it makes seams semi-waterproof. We often use basting tape in DIY project videos. It's great to use with bags, marine projects, and any other application where these qualities are desired. Next, we have fabric pins. These are the oldest sewing notions used to hold layers of fabric together. Some advantages of pins are that they're inexpensive, reusable, can hold multiple layers together, and it can be used for more than just hemming. We would recommend this notion for home decor projects, for sewing clothing, as well as any other sewing project where these qualities are desired. Lastly, we have fabric clips, which are a newer sewing notion to hit the market. Some advantages of clips are that they hold multiple layers together without piercing the fabric. They're reusable, and they're easy to see. We will be using all of these notions to show a variety of hems. There is no standard hem size for any of these hems. Make sure to choose the size that is best suited for your project. First, we have the simplest of hems, which is a single hem. Here we have some lighter home decor fabric, because this is the type of application that this hem is going to be most used on. A single hem will have the edge folded over, leaving one of the raw edges exposed. So make sure to take that into consideration when you choose this hem. Once we have our edge folded, we're going to be using some pins to hold it into place. So a tip when using pins is to make sure that you place the pin in a direction that's going to be easy to remove as you sew. So if we bring our hem over to the sewing machine and we're sewing, we want to make sure that the pins are coming towards us to make it easy to remove instead of going towards the foot. We're going to place a couple pins in here. Now you typically place pins every 6 to 8 inches on an application, but because this is just an example piece of fabric, we're going to put 2 in here. Once we have that pinned into place, we're going to take it under our foot and we're going to turn the machine on. Then we're going to be using our magnetic sewing guide to ensure a straight stitch. So we're going to line our magnetic sewing guide up on the 3/4 inch mark on our stitch plate. Just like we've learned in our previous Learning to Sew videos, we're going to be holding our thread ends back for the first few stitches. Then we're going to reverse stitch to back stitch over our stitches. Then once we approach a pin, We're gonna remove it and continue to sew. When we're at the end, we're gonna backstitch. And then you have a single hem. There's a variation to the single hem if you'd like to install hardware on your hem. A regular hem will not be strong enough to hold a grommet or fastener, so you can actually add a layer of webbing to add strength to the hem. So you're gonna start by adding some basting tape to the edge of your fabric. Then you're gonna add basting tape to the edge of your webbing. For this hem, you can either have the webbing right up against the first line of basting tape and then fold the edge over, just like so, or you can have the webbing further down so that the hem fully covers the webbing. That's totally your personal preference. For our example, we're gonna be showing you how to do it with it up against the top edge. We're first gonna remove the transfer paper on the webbing, and you're going to wanna make sure that the basting tape side of the webbing is at the bottom. So we're gonna line it up really close to the top edge of the basting tape and press that down, then remove the transfer paper on the top and fold the edge down. All right, now that the edge is folded down, we're gonna sew it into place. We're gonna be sewing a stitch along the top edge and the bottom edge of the webbing. Now you have a single hem with webbing. Moving on to a rolled hem. This is a simple hem that will have finished edges on both sides of the fabric. So we're gonna start by folding our fabric a 1/4 inch down. Then we're gonna fold our fabric again 1 inch down. Then we're gonna use some pins to hold it into place. Now we're gonna take it over and place it under the foot. Again, we're gonna be using our magnetic sewing guide just to ensure a straight stitch line. And that is a rolled edge. The next hem that we have is a double hem. This hem is similar to a single hem, but like the name implies, it has 2 folds, which is gonna hide the raw edge and provide fabric strength. Since this hem is often used in conjunction with hardware like grommets, we're gonna be using a marine canvas fabric and we're gonna be using basting tape. So we're gonna take our basting tape and we're gonna apply it along the top edge of our fabric. The size of your hem is completely dependent on what you're gonna be using your fabric for. So that sometimes depends on the size of your grommet or just the look that you're going for. We're gonna be using a 1 inch hem just for our example. We're gonna fold it over, just like so. Then we're gonna take our basting tape and again apply it to this top edge. We're gonna remove the transfer paper and roll it over again. Then we're gonna take it to our sewing machine. For this hem, you can either have just 1 stitch at the bottom or you can stitch at the bottom and at the top for a more finished look, but it's your personal preference. We're gonna show you for this example how to stitch on both sides. Again, we're gonna be using our magnetic sewing guide for a straight stitch. It looks like our hem is a little bit bigger than 1 inch, so we're just gonna move it slightly out. This is what it's gonna look like with 1 stitch, and we're gonna apply a second one on the top. For this stitch, we're gonna remove our magnetic sewing guide and we're gonna use the edge of the inside presser foot as our stitch guide. This is what the double hem with both stitches will look like. Now we will show you how to sew a bound hem. With this hem, you'll use binding to hide the raw edge of the fabric. This hem is typically used for biminis, dodgers, and bags, but it's not great for fastener installation, so keep that in mind. This hem can be very fast and professional for large applications, and it's best achieved with a binder attachment. So we're going to slide our binder into place, which we've already installed onto our sewing machine bed. So I'm going to go ahead and slide my binding into the binder feeder. And then another side note just for our machine is we went ahead and moved our needle to the right position just to be able to sew this binding easier. Then we're going to take our fabric and slide it into the little fold of the binder. Then we're going to lower our presser foot. And then we can sew this hem. It's really as simple as that. As long as you make sure the fabric is in the fold of the binder, it's really as simple as that. It doesn't take any more work. It perfectly feeds the binding and works together with the walking feet to provide professionally bound hems with ease. There's a bound hem. We have 4 binder attachments at Sailrite that sew all the most common binding widths for whatever you're making. Our binders come in the following sizes: 3/4 inch, 1 inch, 1 1/4 inch, and 2 inch. And you can find them all on our Sailrite website. We have a variation of this hem that would allow for hardware installation. A variation of this hem that will allow for hardware installation would be to add a layer of webbing in between the binding. We already have our binding in our binder feeder from the last hem. And this time we're going to slide both the webbing and the fabric in the binder crease. Something to note with this type of hem is to make sure that you're using a webbing that will fit in the binder feeder attachment. So we're going to be using this 2-inch seatbelt webbing just for an example. With this hem, we're also going to sew a line of stitches at the bottom of the webbing to hold it into place. That is a bound hem with webbing installed. Moving on to a taped edge. This hem is typically used for tarps and trampolines. For this hem, we're going to be using a Sailrite tape material that's 6 inches wide, and we're going to be using a piece of trampoline mesh fabric. So start by folding the Sailrite strip in half to make a crease. So once you have that crease line, you can go ahead and add a piece of basting tape to each of the longer edges. Then you can go ahead and remove the transfer paper. Now we're going to line our trampoline mesh fabric up right against the crease line. And then fold the other half over. Now we're going to sew this into place, and we're going to sew a stitch line on each edge and down the middle. You can have 3 stitches or more, whatever you want to reinforce your hem. This wide hemmed area is ideal for installing the large hardware needed for trampolines. And this is what a taped edge should look like. The last hem that we have to show you is a drawstring sleeve, which is typically used on bags and covers. So we're going to start by marking a small mark 4 inches down from the top on each side. So we're going to measure 4 inches down on each side. Now we're going to fold a triangle-shaped fold all the way down to each mark. So we're going to start at the mark and fold this triangle shape all the way up. And we're going to hold that fold in place with some fabric clips. And it should look like this. We're gonna do the same thing to the other side. And there's both sides folded. Now we're gonna sew these folds into place. This is what the edges should look like once you've sewn them. Now we're gonna apply a piece of 1/4-inch basting tape to the top edge. Then we're gonna remove the transfer paper. So we're just gonna fold this down to create a 1/4-inch hem at the top. Then we're gonna apply another piece of basting tape on top of that one. And this time we're gonna fold it all the way down to the 4-inch mark that we made, like so. But before we do so, we're gonna place our drawstring in the pocket. And this is just an example, so we just have a piece of rope here. Just like this, and then we're gonna sew along that fold. Now we're gonna go ahead and sew up the fabric piece and then turn it right side out to show you the finished drawstring hem. So here is the finished drawstring hem. So you would just pull on the rope and there you have it. Those are a handful of basic hems that all kinds of sewers use. Now if you've missed any of our previous Learning to Sew videos, we've linked a full playlist in the description below so that you can catch up. And if you're looking for a project to start your sewing journey, we have plenty of DIY project videos ranging from beginners all the way through more experienced sewers. Make sure to subscribe to our 2 YouTube channels, Sailrite Workbench and Sailrite DIY, because you won't want to miss out on the hundreds of free video resources there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time for part 5 of our Learning to Sew series. Welcome back to our Sailrite Workbench. This is the 5th video in a series we're calling Learning to Sew. So whether you're new to sewing or you just need a refresher, this is the perfect place for you. Today's video, we're going to be going over the 2 most common ways to sew zippers. We will be teaching you how to sew a zipper using the fold under method, which can be used on a variety of applications, including bags and canvas work. We're also going to show you how to sew zipper plaques for cushions and pillows. Let's start with the fold under method. We are going to be showing you this method on a single piece of marine canvas with a size 5 finished zipper. If you're not sure what zipper is right for your application, make sure to check out our zipper selection guide by clicking the info button in the top right corner of the screen. Depending on your application and pattern, you can either keep the zipper tape together and sew down both sides of the fabric, or you can separate the teeth and sew each side separately. It's a little bit more complex to sew each zipper separately, so that's what we're going to show you for this example. If you're working with a large span of zipper tape, so larger than we have here, but we're going to show you for this example, you'll want to make sure that you have match-up marks to ensure that the teeth line up with each other so that when you zip it, there won't be any bubbles or spacing differences. So we're going to show you how to do that, even though you typically do it on a larger application than this. So what you're going to do is you're going to have a marking tool and you're going to flip the zipper upside down. Since this is the side that we're going to be referencing and sewing on, we'll want to make the mark on this side. So we're going to line it up against the edge where we're going to want it sewn. So we're going to have this edge just a little bit further down and then this top edge a little bit further up. And then we're going to make a mark on this fabric and just go ahead and go all the way across. We'll just have 3 match-up marks, one on the top, bottom, and the middle. And then what we're going to do is we're going to slide this piece over to this edge and line it up with the top and bottom that we marked on the other side. And we're going to line those same marks up. So once those marks are made, we can go ahead and separate the zipper. We are gonna start with one side of the chain and one side of the fabric. So we're gonna place the second one to the side. Right now we're working with the piece that has the zipper attached, and we're gonna be sewing it with the zipper part facing down so that it matches up with our matchup marks. So the zipper is gonna lie like this when it's sewn. So on the opposite side, we're gonna add some basting tape. We're gonna be using a 1/4 inch basting tape so that we can get the basting tape as far over on the edge as possible so it doesn't get stuck in the zipper chain or it isn't visible on the application. Now we're gonna remove the transfer paper and line up the zipper evenly with the fabric edge. This is where you'll want the matchup marks to line up. At this point, you can either sew a line of stitches on this side and then sew a top stitch when you flip it, or you can just go ahead and fold it over and sew a single stitch to secure it. By sewing a first stitch line here, you will create a line of stitches that are hidden and won't be exposed to sun or abrasion, while also providing extra strength. So if those things are important for your project, choose that option. Otherwise, you can just fold the top piece over and sew. We're gonna be sewing the 2 lines of stitches for our example, just to be able to show you what that looks like, but feel free to skip this next step. So we're gonna take this piece over to our sewing machine, and we're actually gonna change our foot out for a zipper foot. So now with our zipper foot, we're gonna take it under the sewing machine foot, and we're gonna sew a line of stitches that are a 1/4 inch away from the edge. So next, we're gonna flip the piece and fold the fabric back to expose the right side of the zipper. So at this point, you can decide whether you wanna make your fabric lie on the zipper or further back from the zipper. You can either have the teeth kind of hidden by the fabric, so that when you zip it up, the zipper will be hidden, or you can have the fabric folded a little bit further back. And this is really just your preference. So for our example, we're gonna be folding it back a little bit further. So now we're gonna sew a stitch on the top. Make sure that you leave enough room between the teeth and the fabric for the slide to pass without the ability for it to get caught on the fabric. So there is 1/2 of the zipper. And now we're gonna finish the other side and show you the finished look. So here is the finished stitch. So just pretend like this is 2 sides of a bag. So that's what it'll look like when it's done. The second zipper approach is called a zipper plaque, and it's used mainly for pillows and cushions. This way of sewing zippers will leave the zipper hidden beneath the fabric. We are going to be using a long, narrow piece of fabric like this one to imitate the side of a cushion where you'd want to add a zipper. So we're going to put our zipper to the side just for a second, and we're going to fold this piece in half, and we're going to have the wrong side facing out. Now on the side that has the fold, we're going to sew a stitch along that edge. Now to get our seam allowance, we're going to want 1/2 of the width of the zipper tape. So we're gonna line our zipper up about right in the dead center of the zipper. Then we're gonna use our magnetic sewing guide and line it up at that distance. That way we can remove the zipper, put it to the side, and use that as our distance. This is just a tacking stitch, so it's going to be removed later on. Because of this, we don't need a back stitch at the beginning or end, and we're going to be using the longest stitch length possible. The next step is to cut the crease open. Then open the assembly and splay out the hemmed area so that it lies flat. Depending on your fabric, sometimes it can be easier to iron this out, or if you don't have an iron or your fabric can't be ironed, you can also just use the edge of the table to get it to lie flat. So there we go. I think that's about as good as we can get it to lie. Now we're gonna take our zipper and we're gonna lay it face down, so the side that's gonna be the outside is gonna be laid down, because this is the back side of the application. And we're gonna line it up. Because we use half the zipper width, it should line up pretty perfectly with the edge of the splayed area. So now we're gonna take it over to our sewing machine and sew a stitch down either side. Since this stitch will be permanent, we are gonna back stitch on this one. And again, we're just gonna make sure as we sew that the zipper chain is gonna be lined up exactly in the middle. Now we're gonna do the same thing on the opposite side. Next, take a seam ripper. We're gonna flip this over to the right side, and we're gonna remove this first stitch that we made. So we're gonna get it started and flip to the side with the safety ball. So then we have the exposed zipper, and it can be totally hidden by the fabric. Now, obviously, if this was a real application, you would want to have something to stop the end of the slider from running off the chain, or sewing a piece of fabric here to add stops, but for this example, we're going to leave the zipper as is. Those are just two of the most common ways to sew zippers. Now, if you haven't already seen the rest of our Learning to Sew series, we've linked the playlist in the description below so that you can catch up and watch them all. Now, if you're looking for a project to start your sewing journey, we have plenty of free how-to videos for beginners all the way through more advanced sewers. Make sure to subscribe to our two YouTube channels, Sailrite Workbench and Sailrite DIY, because you won't want to miss out on the hundreds of free video resources there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time for part 6 of our Learning to Sew series. Welcome back to our Sailrite Workbench. This is the 6th video in a series we're calling Learning to Sew. So whether you're new to sewing or you need a refresher, this is the perfect place for you. Today we're going to be showing you how to sew piping. Piping adds a crisp, finished look to edges of pillows and cushions. Although not every project uses piping, it's still a very valuable technique to learn. For this example, we're going to be using some pre-made vinyl piping. If you would like to learn how to make your own piping to match your project, check out our video on making custom piping, which we've linked in the description, as well as the info button in the top right corner. We are going to be using the UltraFeed LSC with a piping foot attachment. So make sure that you have the proper foot for your machine to accommodate piping. We've cut a square of fabric to represent the plate of a cushion application. So we want to start our piping on what will be the back side of the cushion. So since this is a square piece of fabric, we can just decide what the back side is. So start your piping a little bit above the halfway point on this side. This is just going to make joining the two ends easier. The piping is going to be installed on the edge of the fabric with the cording part closest to the inside, because this is the side that will be shown once the pieces are sewn together. Now, if you'd like, you can hold the piping in place as you sew, or you can use clips or basting tape. For this example, we're gonna be using basting tape to hold it into place. So we're gonna make sure to apply it as close to the edge of the piping as possible. Now that we're close to a corner, we can talk about some techniques to achieve the cleanest look. So first of all, if you don't have pre-made slits in the piping like ours, you will want to add some pre-made slits here. This just allows the fabric to bend more easily. So the sharpness of your corners is up to you. You can either have a wider corner or you can have a sharper 90-degree corner. We're gonna show you a little bit more of a sharp corner. So there, that is what our corner is gonna look like. So we're gonna go ahead and apply the rest of the piping to the cushion face. So when we get back to our start point, we're just gonna leave a couple inches of extra overlap for now. So with the piping lined up correctly, we're gonna take the piece over to our sewing machine and line it up with the groove of the presser foot. So for the ultra feed, we recommend rotating the balance wheel until the bottoms of the presser feet are level, which will just make it easier to position the piping in the channel. As we start sewing, there's no need to backstitch since we'll be sewing back over it when we get to the end. When we get pretty close to the corner, we're gonna go ahead and bury our needle. So if you wanna be extra precise with your stitches, you can actually hand crank the balance wheel, or you can use the speed reduction upgrade package with the Monster 2 balance wheel to achieve slow speed control. Then we're just gonna slowly sew around the corner, making sure to get the stitch as close to the piping as possible without going in the piping. So if you want to make a turn, you can bury your needle, lift the presser foot up, and rotate it. So once you've rounded the corner, you can continue sewing as normal. And then as we approach the second corner, we can demonstrate how to sew that again. This time, we're gonna use our Monster 2 balance wheel to show you how to slowly use your pedal control to take this turn. We currently have the worker bee motor dial turned to its slowest speed setting, which is a half stitch per second. So once we've gotten a few inches away from our start point, we are gonna bury our needle, and then we're gonna show you how to match up the ends. First, we're gonna pull back the fabric a little bit from the piping. So if you don't have pre-made piping, you might have to rip out some of the stitches to do this. Then we're gonna line our cording up, just like so, and we're gonna use our scissors and cut straight across it. And since we cut at the same point, they should be flush now. We actually have a little bit too much excess on this one, so we're gonna cut some of that off, just like that. Then we're gonna tuck one side of the piping in the other, making sure that the cording is lining up with each other. Then we're gonna fold that outer edge around the other one, so it kind of just sandwiches it. If your piping is woven fabric instead of vinyl like we have, then you'll want to fold this in under so that there's no raw edge exposed. But since ours is vinyl, we don't have to worry about that. Then we're gonna sandwich that and continue to sew it into place. And then we'll go ahead and backstitch here. Next, we're gonna show you how to add the next layer to your application. So we have a piece of fabric that will be the side of the cushion. So this is also known as the boxing. So we are gonna line the fabric up with the edge of the application, and we're gonna use some basting tape to hold that into place. And then just like the piping, we're gonna make some notches to take this corner a little bit easier. So obviously we don't have a full boxing for this. This is just an example. So then we're gonna take it back under the sewing machine and place it in that same groove and sew it into place. So here is the finished example. If you're not satisfied with the crease that is created in piping when it is sewn around a sharp corner, you can use a more rounded corner instead. Creating a more rounded corner is easier to sew, and for this example, we wanted to show you the harder way to do it so that you would know how. That's how you sew piping on an application. Now, if you haven't already seen the rest of our Learning to Sew series, we've linked the playlist in the description below, so make sure to check that out. And if you're looking for a project to start your sewing journey, we have a range of DIY project videos from beginners all the way through more advanced sewers. Make sure to subscribe to our 2 YouTube channels, Sailrite Workbench and Sailrite DIY, because you won't want to miss out on the hundreds of free video resources there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time for part 7 of our Learning to Sew series. Welcome back to our Sailrite Workbench. This is the 7th and final video in a series we're calling Learning to Sew. So whether you're new to sewing or you just need a refresher, this is the perfect place for you. Today, we're going to share some essential tools and notions that you'll need to get started sewing. To make it easy to get yours, we've linked all of them in our description below. Jumping into sewing can seem intimidating because of all the parts and pieces that you can buy. But we wanted to make it as simple as possible to get going because the only way to learn is by doing. We are going to cover all the essentials in 3 main categories: measuring and patterning, cutting, and sewing machine accessories. First, you'll need a way to measure and pattern. A tape measure is a convenient way to measure just about anything. It's flexible and easy to wrap up and take with you on the go. Now, a ruler is a necessary tool for both measuring and patterning. The clear acrylic ruler makes it easy to see your material and line the ruler up wherever you need it. It also features degree guides, which is extremely useful when you need to cut on a bias or at an angle. Along with creating a straight edge to mark on your material, it also acts as a straight edge for a rotary cutter, which helps you get clean cuts every time. And the tool that goes hand in hand with this ruler is a marking tool. One of the most versatile marking tools is the chalk pencil cartridge set. It comes with an assortment of chalk colors that you can use with a variety of different colored materials. The canvas patterning ruler is a Sailrite exclusive tool which is used to pattern circles and straight lines. The ruler's lipped edge makes it incredibly easy to scribe a line a set distance away from your fabric's edge. This is great when marking hemlines and fold lines. The metal end is also super handy when creating sharp creases on materials. The next section of essentials is for cutting. We recommend thread snips, scissors, a rotary cutter, and a seam ripper. Although all of these tools are used for cutting, they each have their unique purpose. Thread snips are used to trim threads after sewing. These are also called nippers. This tool is spring-loaded and has sharp ends, making them easier to use than traditional scissors for cutting thread after sewing. Next, we have scissors. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Scissors are a versatile tool used to cut fabrics, webbing, and other project materials. Now, a rotary cutter is a cutting tool with a circular blade that lets you cut long runs of material in one go. These cutters can be used by both right and left-handed crafters. With a rotary cutter, you also need a safe surface to cut on. We have cutting mats that are soft, which won't dull the blade unlike other surfaces, while also protecting your work table. Why do we recommend both scissors and a rotary cutter? Well, depending on your project, one of these cutting tools might be preferred over the other. Scissors are more portable and don't require a cutting mat, whereas rotary cutters cut long runs of fabric faster than scissors and cause less hand fatigue. We highly recommend having both in your workshop so you can choose the cutting tool that best suits your project. The last tool in this section is a seam ripper. This small and sometimes overlooked tool is invaluable, especially for a beginner. Sometimes you need to redo some work if a seam doesn't run straight or you stitch the wrong panels or section accidentally. A seam ripper makes it easy to remove unwanted stitches. This handheld tool has a tiny blade that cuts seams without damaging your fabric. The third and final category is sewing machine accessories. To get started sewing, you will need needles, thread, presser feet, and other sewing aids. Each sewing machine and type of project require different types of these items, so you'll want to make sure that you know what your machine and project call for before getting these supplies. With our Sailrite Ultra Feed, we offer a wide variety of upgrade packages that are perfect for new sewers because it'll come with all the necessary notions and components for your DIY style. Each package includes notions and accessories that are most used in each category of sewing, like upholstery, leather, bag making, and sail and canvas work. If you would like to learn more about these packages, you can watch our video that goes over everything included in each package, which we've linked in the info button in the top right corner. Now, beyond each specific type of sewing market, there is one upgrade package that I would recommend to every new sewer, and that is the Ultra Feed Speed Reduction Package. This package comes with the Monster 2 balance wheel and all the parts needed to gear down your motor for ultimate slow speed control. I can't tell you how valuable stitch-by-stitch control is when learning to sew. And that's the end of our Learning to Sew series. Now, if you've missed any of the previous videos in this series, we've linked the full playlist of those videos in the description below so that you can catch up. And now that you know all of the basic sewing skills to get started, it's time to put those new skills to the test. We have multiple bag kits that come with all the materials necessary to create an awesome project, while also teaching you valuable sewing techniques and practicing your sewing. In fact, it's kind of like taking an online sewing class. Plus, you get to make a high-quality custom bag. And if you want hundreds of free project tutorials and sewing videos, make sure to subscribe to our 2 YouTube channels, Sailrite Workbench and Sailrite DIY, because you won't want to miss out on all those resources. Thanks for watching this series, and we'll see you guys next time.